Hello, everyone. My name is Frances McMahon, nickname Murph, you may be familiar with, and I am the director of an organization called Stand With Me Assistance Dog Team Training. We are a training school to help veterans learn to train their own dogs to become their service dogs. We do private lessons, group classes, coaching one-on-one, phone support for raising a puppy. And in the end, we help veterans who, our niche clientele are veterans who struggle with a service-connected mental health disability. So that's the target population that we serve. If you wouldn't mind taking the time to scan this QR code and take just a moment or two, you can pause this presentation anytime you want. So please answer the questions on the survey. There are only a few. It should only take you 2 minutes to answer the questions, and it will be very helpful in our grant report. We have a grant from the Clee Foundation and Broome County helping us create this presentation. And if you would answer the questions before the start of the presentation and then again at the end of the presentation, it will hopefully collect statistics showing that community members are more educated at the end of the presentation and accurately knowledgeable about the topic. Today, we're going to review these topics. What is a service dog? What are public access rights and who has them? What's not a service dog? That's probably very important for business owners and public facing staff, people who are concierges at entrance desks, wait staff in restaurants, any number of people who are working in public places, how to recognize a genuine service dog and how to identify fraudulent service dogs is very important. And for the general public, when you see service dogs out in public, if you're shopping or eating in a restaurant, etiquette and responsibilities on interacting with a service dog team. And we'll talk just for a moment at the end about Stand With Me, who we are, what we do. We always have to take a moment to pause and make sure that we're not offering any legal advice to anyone. So the first question, what is a service dog? I want to stress that there are two terms that are interchangeable, and that is service dogs and assistance dogs. The jargon has changed in the last 5 or 6 years, and what used to be referred to as an assistance dog is now referred to as a service dog. So those two terms are interchangeable, and they're the only two that are interchangeable. We're going to talk more about therapy dogs and emotional support dogs. They are not at all the same as a service dog. This particular slide is a synopsis of the pages that refer to the service dog section of ADA law. ADA law is a federal law called the Americans with Disabilities Act. And if you want to go and really inform yourself thoroughly about this law, you can find it at ada.gov. And I would encourage everyone to only use the ada.gov website and not any social media or private website, because there's a lot of inaccurate information on the internet. So if you want to collect information, this was excerpted straight from the ADA law page. And if you want more details, please go to that page to find your information. So this slide exemplifies just a few of the things that service dogs do to help people with a disability. I want to stress that only those with a disability have public access rights or are allowed to bring their service dog to places where the general public go, and dogs are not typically allowed. Restaurants would be a good example, a doctor's office, grocery stores. So only dogs who are accompanying the person with the disability are allowed to go to those places. And this list that you see here is just some examples of some of the tasks that service dogs do that help people with a disability. Today, we're going to talk about the last one, calming a person. Calming is only part of it. There are also very specific tasks that service dogs do to help people who struggle with a mental health disability, which includes PTSD. We typically serve veterans who are diagnosed with PTSD disability. I'm going to stress there's a huge difference between diagnosis and disability. Because someone is seeing a doctor and may have a mental health diagnosis, that does not mean it's severe enough to be categorized as a disabling condition. Stand With Me only serves people who, military folks, who have a disabling mental health condition that is connected directly to their time in the military. So these are a few of the example specific tasks that our service dogs connected with Stand With Me are trained to do. These tasks, by the way, are in addition to absolutely impeccable manners, obedience, and desensitization to public environments training. I would say the vast majority of our training work is to train dogs to be impeccably behaved, always standing at their human's side, and they do their tasks when they're told to, but most of the time they're quiet and standing or lying right at their person's feet. And you would not witness them pulling or tugging or barking or jumping. Any of those things are significant and would signal that perhaps it's a fraudulent service dog. This page has a few, not all, of the examples of the more common tasks that we train our service dogs to do for veterans. And these are typically some of the disabling symptoms that veterans who struggle with PTSD diagnosis and disability struggle with. And the dogs all help with those symptoms and help the veteran to function in public environments and at home with their disability. One of the questions we commonly get in our organization is, can any breed be a service dog? Many people assume that if you see a Pomeranian as a service dog, that it must be a fake. Pomeranians are tiny little dogs that weigh probably around 10 to 15 pounds. These dogs here, all of the photos on this slide presentation are photos of the dogs in our program, either graduates or students. And these are examples of a typical service dog size. But a Pomeranian is not a suitable breed for mobility assistance or even for deep pressure therapy, but it might be a perfectly suitable breed for diabetic alert dog. There's no reason why a small dog can't jump up and down and bounce and bark and maybe, bounce off of its human, his or her human, to indicate that a diabetes sugar imbalance is about to happen. So the size of the dog needs to be relevant to the tasks that the dog is required to do. All Stand With Me dogs are between 30 and 80 pounds. There are a couple of exceptions, but in the oversized dog breeds, but most of our dogs are between 30 and 75 or 80 pounds. And these are good examples of a typical service dog, but just because a dog is small or extra large does not mean that they must be fraudulent. Public access rights are given and are a privilege to people who struggle with a disability. Please keep in mind, it is not the dog that has public access rights. It is the person with the disability who has the dog, and ADA designates service dogs as medical equipment. So the dog is part of a person's disability medical equipment. This is a photo of one of our dogs on the Broome Transit System, and it just exemplifies much of the training that we do. So any place where the general public is allowed to go must allow a person with a disability to have their well-trained service dog with them. This particular slide exemplifies, it was intended in the beginning to exemplify how a service dog is categorized as medical equipment. I also use this slide to exemplify how some disabilities are visible and some are not. If you'll notice, the man in the wheelchair and the woman with an oxygen tank, if you saw them in public, you would never question that they have a disability, and you would never question their right to have their medical equipment with them. The veteran, one of our graduates on the right, does not appear to be disabled. We call this an invisible disability. So people with who are deaf people who have diabetes issues, seizure problems, and people with mental health disabilities. Those disabilities are all invisible, and it's extremely important that the general public not dismiss a dog as being fraudulent just because the human on the other end of the leash does not appear to be disabled. Many states go above and beyond federal law. New York State is one of those. And in New York State, service dogs in training, in the Stand With Me organization, we have 2 different vests that we assign to our dogs. And one of them is in training, and that is when a dog is in student status and still working towards the kind of excellent behavior we expect of a service dog. And then the other one will say service dog at work. All of them will say, please do not touch or do not pet. It's a good idea for you to look up your particular state's laws because some of them are different from one another. Pennsylvania, I believe, is also the same as New York State. It's important for business owners, people in the general public, public-facing staff, to know what is not a service dog. So you can decipher which dogs you may excuse from your premises and which dogs you must allow to enter. So this particular dog has a vest on, if you will see, that says ESA Support Canine. That ESA stands for Emotional Support Animal. And as you may or may not remember, the airlines in this country used to allow emotional support animals on public transit flights. And they no longer do that. Now they're limiting to only service dogs. And quite a screening process is required for dogs to get on a plane now. And the screening process is, of course, for the dog's training level and also for the human's disability. But this dog, if you see a vest that says ESA or Emotional Support Dog, that dog does not have public access rights. There's another law that we'll talk about later, which applies to emotional support animals, but it's this dog and any dog with a vest or a collar that says emotional support, or a human who reports to you that their dog has to be with them for emotional support, they do not have public access rights. So these are examples of what the other categories of dogs do and are. And they do have a purpose, and there is a law that protects emotional support animals, but it has nothing to do with public access. We'll talk about therapy dogs in a moment, but emotional support dogs are allowed under a different law called the FHA, which stands for Federal Fair Housing Act. And those dogs, if the person with a psychiatric condition and a diagnosis, not a disability, but a diagnosis, if they can present a landlord with a prescription with their physician's license number on it, stating that they need this emotional support animal to live with them, landlords must allow the dog to live with them in a building where dogs are not typically allowed. That is the only law that protects emotional support dogs, and it only applies to housing, not to public access. Therapy dogs, whole different category. They have no rights whatsoever, and there is no law that protects them. They are much more highly trained than an emotional support dog is, not usually as highly trained as a service dog, but they've had quite a bit of training because they have to be well-mannered, under control, and desensitized to all kinds of public spaces and noises. And they do have a training process, a testing process, a certification process, and most of the high visible, legitimate organizations that do the testing and certification in this country also provide a huge liability policy that covers each team. When we say team, we refer to a dog and the human handler who's handling that dog. So I am a tester observer for a large national organization called Alliance of Therapy Dogs. And once I have tested a team, that team is covered and they're certified, they've passed and certified, that team is covered with $5 million liability policy, which most hospitals and public places that want to invite therapy dog teams in want the liability policy, but it's important to know that a therapy dog has no public access rights, and they do get special invitations to go places upon invitation where normally pet dogs are not allowed to go. This infographic, you can access it through this QR code, but there is a front and back, and it makes it very easy at a glance to remember which dogs fall into which categories and which dogs have which rights, and what to expect from them. A lot of people, like security guard would be an example, keep this posted by their desk. So when a dog comes walking through the door and their job is security, they're able to decipher at a glance which is which and who they must excuse and who must they allow to pass. So many people are not really sure how to identify a service dog. It's important to know that ADA law does not require a service dog to wear an identifying vest. The Stand With Me organization and most large, legitimate service dog training organizations we require all of our dogs in training or graduated to have a vest on at all times when they are using their public access rights. It's very considerate of the staff in a facility to identify your dog so that they're not forced to approach you and ask you to leave and then have a conversation with them. So the vest is a clue, but and if the dog is behaving in an exemplary fashion and is not causing any disruption whatsoever, then you would just assume that it's a legitimate service dog team and allow them to pass and leave them be. It is important that even if a service dog vest is on the dog, if the dog is misbehaving or the human on the other end of the leash cannot answer the questions that you are allowed to ask according to ADA law, that it's likely or probable that that is a fraudulent service dog. And by the way, if a human has a disability and they have a right to have a service dog with them, however, their service dog is behaving in a disruptive manner, you still have the right to excuse the dog from the premises. You must provide your services to that person. For example, if you were doing a restaurant and you had to excuse the dog because the dog was jumping on the counter or barking or was shaking and they weren't well groomed and hair is flying in other patrons' coffee cups, you would be allowed to excuse that dog from your premises, but you must also offer to do a takeout order and bring the food or beverage to the disabled person at their car. So they must have access to your services, but you don't need to allow the dog into your premises. So you may also ask service dog handlers what tasks their dog has been trained to do to help them with their disability. They must have at least 2 answers for you. So these are a few of the tasks, not our veterans, but these are typical tasks that service dogs will do for someone with a disability. The picking up items for someone with a physical disability does apply to many of our veteran service dogs because many of our veterans have had multiple orthopedic surgeries and it's painful for them to bend over and pick something up off of the floor. So we train their dogs to pick up dropped items, a phone, a set of keys, whatever the case may be. They don't have to bend over and inflict great pain upon themselves, and their dog's been trained to pick that up. So it is one of the tasks that applies to our veterans. So we're back to the invisible disabilities where you can't tell. This is a person with an invisible, a seizure disorder is invisible, and that is a task that is to someone with an invisible. The blood sugar thing, alerting someone who's about to have a blood sugar crash is a very definite task for a service dog. Prescribed medications reminders are also a task. And we're going to talk more about the post-traumatic stress disorder tasks. It's not just calming. We do interrupt episodes, and we provide spatial boundaries for, we call it personal space assistance, alerting for a panic attack and bringing someone back out of a panic attack. There are several tasks that service dogs who are assisting a PTSD veteran in coping with public spaces. So, but you may ask someone with a service dog, what tasks has your dog been trained to do to help you with your disability? They must be familiar with this question and have the answers at the ready. So here we just review that service dogs are not required to wear a vest or have a certification. It's typical and it's good etiquette, and we train our dogs to do that, but it's not a requirement. Okay, the best way to identify a service dog is through its behavior and also the respectful answers and respectful behavior of the person on the other end of the leash who's struggling with a disability. These are things that you can see. You can review this slideshow at any time. And these are the things you should see and should not see. If you see any of the things that are listed in the right-hand side of this screen, you are allowed under law to excuse the dog from your premises, even if the person handling the dog has a legitimate disability. This is just a review of the same things. If it's not obvious, you can ask these questions. Is this dog with you because of a disability? And what tasks has your dog been trained to do to help you with your disability? Those are the only things you can ask someone. You may not ask them what their disability is or require any documentation about their disability. You may also not ask them to demonstrate the dog's abilities. You must have just observed the dog's behavior. If they're well-groomed, quiet, standing immediately at their human handler's side and are not causing any disruption whatsoever, then you must, and that the human handler has the answers to the questions, you must assume it's legitimate and allow them access to your site. This slide is just a nice presentation about this veteran had to be hospitalized, taken in an ambulance. He was fortunate enough that the medical staff in all of the facilities he had to visit for his emergency were well educated, and he did not face any denial of access. The ambulance staff that took him to the hospital allowed the dog to go. The hospital staff accommodated the dog beautifully. The veteran was the one who had to arrange for family members and friends to take the dog out at regular intervals and care for the dog while he was hospitalized. But the hospital staff in this particular situation was excited and volunteered to help with the dog's care. But it is the disabled person's responsibility to make sure the dog is well cared for if there's a multiple day stay in a hospital. This, back to that slide again, this particular veteran was also helicoptered from one hospital to another. And the helicopter medical staff also allowed the dog to ride in the helicopter. There were no problems or issues because the dog was so well trained and so desensitized to public places and mayhem and noise and different environments. If you have a dog who's never been on public transportation before, you're not going to get that kind of excellent behavior. This photograph is exemplary of one of our oversized dogs. So that is a Great Dane, and you can see that this veteran has had traumatic brain injuries and has balance issues, and he is a large man, so he needed an oversized dog so that he could reach out and touch the dog's shoulders to help with his balance issues. So that's a task that's very important in this particular situation, and he needed an oversized dog. He has signed an oversized dog contract that he will never put his dog in public transportation spaces where she doesn't fit comfortably. He will never put her underneath the table of a diner where she can't be comfortable, those kinds of things. But the specific things he wanted his dog to do, it's really important that he have a very large dog for the work that she's required to do. So these are the, again, etiquette items for you to pay attention to when you're dealing with dogs who are coming into your place of business. A big question that we get is someone in my place of business claiming to be allergic a good reason to disallow the service dog to be present? Right on the ADA website, it addresses this issue, and this quote that you see here in type is direct excerpt from the ADA law, and it is not a valid reason. Now, it is a valid reason if the dog is not well groomed. The photo on the left, you'll see 3 service dogs underneath a table in a restaurant. I'm actually testing 2 veteran service dogs if their dogs will lie down, be still under a restaurant table for longer than an hour without any disruption at all. This is me with my dog. This is one of our veterans who's doing their restaurant test, another veteran who's doing her restaurant test. These are the same, different dogs we're practicing in Home Depot, how to back up into cubby spaces and do a down stay. So, but what's important to know is that if someone in your restaurant or someone on an airplane says, you know, I'm allergic to dogs, I can't be, you have to make the dog leave. The airline staff at that point would say, okay, we have to accommodate the allergic person, so we're going to put the dog at one end of the plane and the allergic person at the other end of the plane and try to accommodate it as best as possible that way. You can't ask the dog to leave. The dog does have to be well groomed. On the left, if one of these dogs was not brushed thoroughly and other patrons in the restaurant found dog hair in their coffee cup from one of these dogs, then the restaurant would be allowed to excuse the dog who's got hair flying all over the place. We spend a great deal of time teaching and coaching our veterans on grooming practices so there will be no flyaway hair and the dander that's attached to it, which causes the allergies. So they're just little tips for it's okay for you to ask a dog to leave, but here are the things that can guide you in that process of asking a dog to leave. Okay. If you have a legitimately disabled dog handler, service dog handler, and you approach them and ask them questions, these are the things you should encounter. The handler will immediately correct any inappropriate behavior. Typically, with our dogs, it's before the dog causes a disruption. And they will readily acknowledge that the dog's made a mistake and apologize, and they will willingly leave the premises, usually without even being asked if the dog is creating a disruption that they can't immediately stop. These are the places where you can report a fraudulent service dog if they give you a hard time and it causes an incident for you. These are also the same places where we will report a business who unjustly or unlawfully denies access to one of our service dogs. This is etiquette for general public members. This is one of our service dogs in an airport waiting to get on a plane. But it's really best if you stumble into a service dog in the grocery store, at an airport, or anywhere, and they've got a service dog vest on. It's okay to smile at the dog handler and say, what a beautiful dog, as you continue to walk by, but don't try and pet the dog. Don't ask to pet the dog. Don't distract the dog from the work that they're doing. And it's very hard for someone who has a service dog. Let's say they go to Lowe's and they have 5 minutes to go pick up an item in Lowe's, and 8 different people stop them and ask them questions about service dogs along the way. It kind of turns their 5-minute chore into a stressful event. So it's best just to smile and say, what a nice dog, and keep moving along. Stay focused on your own tasks. A little review of the do's and the don'ts for people when you encounter a service dog in a public place. This is one of our service dogs teams. This is an artist who brings her service dog with her everywhere. She's out in the park. So we're not going to cover reasonable accommodation in the workplace in this particular slideshow or this particular presentation. It's not typical, and we do special presentations for people who want that, for people who have staff members who want to bring their service dogs to work with them. There's an entirely different presentation to cover that topic. This is one of our service dogs. By the way, this veteran still does National Guard weekend, and his commander at the National Guard, of course, when they're locally, when they're at the local, I don't know what you call them, places where they go to do their weekends, his commander allows him to bring his service dog with him. And a little bit about Stand With Me. We were founded in 2016 as a response to dozens of inquiries asking for help to train their dogs. I've been a dog trainer in the community for close to 50 years now, and I had a website, and many veterans in the community were reaching out to my Murph's dog training website asking for help to train their dog to become a service dog. It's important for people to know that the VA will not pay for service dogs for veterans who struggle with a service-connected mental health disability. And we don't charge a dime. We raise money and funds for our program, and the services we provide to veterans are free of charge. So that's just a little bit of an overview. This is our training room. This is actually a little bit of we have some changes to those numbers, but they're fairly recent. This is our graduate wall. We have 3 to add to that wall now. That's inside of our training room. We have a training yard, a training site with a recreation area for the dogs. I already talked about this. The VA doesn't pay for this. We're completely dependent to help veterans train their own dogs through funding, and this is a free service to veterans in our community. So if everyone wouldn't mind scanning the same questionnaire again and answering the questions a second time, hopefully, if you made some mistakes on the first run through those questions, you will now have correct answers to those questions. And our statistics collected from those surveys will be very helpful. This is resources that you can go to find out more information. And thank you very much for watching this slideshow. It's great as a responsible community member for you to educate yourself on this topic. Thank you.